Hello and welcome to another video. In this video I'm going to take you through a game that I played in the Black Lion. Now that is a cool name for a chess opening. Probably one of the coolest opening names around. Now can only be beaten, let's think, by maybe the Monkey's Bum. Bloody good name that is. Maybe the Dragon. The Dragon's a good opening. I think lots of kids play the Dragon just because it's called the Dragon. But the Black Lion is a very cool name. Now, before we get on to the game, I'd just like to mention that the D4 DVD has finally arrived in the GingerGM shop. So if you're interested in learning a whole repertoire as white with one D4, so with this move, and it's based on what I have played in my lifetime, and this repertoire has basically got me up to Grandmaster level. It was filmed a good couple of years ago now, but I still play the same opening even nowadays, the same lines I recommend, so it has passed the test of time. Very aggressive DVD. It's, I think, over 11 hours, the two DVDs in total. And I'll just get my sales pitch out the way, if that's okay. And if you want to, if you're interested in buying this DVD, then go to that link there. There you go. GingerGM.com shop. Thank you very much. Buy everything. Killer D4. If you just follow that link, then you can buy the two DVDs for £25. I think that's a bloody good deal because, you know, you're basically getting one-on-one tuition with the white pieces for 11 hours from a Grandmaster. This Grandmaster sitting here for the price of 25 quid. Bargain. And the new website will take you to where the DVDs are, but that's enough of the sales pitch. But I'm very happy with the DVD. I know it's a bit old and I look a bit different. I certainly do. It's taken a long time to get out into the public eye, but it's there now. So go and check it out anyway. You can see a trailer on that site as well, just to have a little glimpse of it. So what is a Black Lion? And I've recently just done a DVD. Bloody hell, I'm doing loads of them now for Chess Base, and I've done this DVD just on the so-called Black Lion. And it's an opening I've played before, and it's a very, very interesting way of meeting E4. And I've just come back from Lille in France. I drove over there this weekend just gone. I play for a French team, Roule Ma Maison, who are from Paris, lovely Paris with the baguettes. And I stayed in Paris for a little bit of time in previous life, and enjoyed it a lot there. And I started playing for this team, I think 8 years ago. The captain is this chap here, Olivier René, who's an extremely nice guy. Has been a second to Karpov, and let's just bring Mr. René up. And also was good friends with Spassky when Spassky lived in France as well, as René was telling me. And he's the captain Grandmaster, but I was playing board one. Now the Black Line, there is a book out on the Black Line, there you go. And it's a good book, don't get me wrong, very imaginative book. I don't want to say bad things about it, because I think if you want to learn the Black Line, you should get this book. There are some, I found, errors in some of the variations in that book, so don't follow it blindly. And now I'm going to take you through really a little lesson on this opening, and I played it on the Saturday, and I was playing against Capone, who's an international master rated 2,420. I think it was a pretty nice game in the end. And because I've done this DVD for Chess Base, which will be out in a couple of months, I know the kind of basic setups you should go for. So anyway, the Black Line starts with D6, and now knight to F6, attacking E4. White defends E4, most natural way, knight to C3. And now the way I play it is with knight B D7. What's Black's strategy? Well, Black's strategy is to go E5, bishop E7, C6, and we'll come to the rest of it a bit later on. Now, you can also go E5 immediately, but this does... Oh, blooming heck! Whoa, where did that come from? Too much garlic over the weekend, maybe. Whoa, a shocker. Okay, anyway, excuse me. That was a bloody big sneeze. Oh, eye-watering. Now, if you go e5 straight away, the problem is white can take an e5 and he can swap queens off. And this position is probably perfectly okay for black, but it's extremely dull. I mean, there's too many Berlins in the world, and this is not my cup of tea. This is a totally different ball game, so we're not going to play into that kind of malarkey. So the way I do it, I go knight b d7 first to potentially block an exchange of queens, and now white has a number of moves. Knight to f3, the most common move, and now I get my e5 set up in. White now plays bishop c4. Again, I think this is the best move because this bishop is most actively placed on c4. And now bishop e7. Now there are some tactical tries white can try. Bishop takes f7 check here, but they're not very good, and you can check that out yourself. But they don't work particularly well. So white castles, and now the one thing I like doing in this opening with black is staying flexible, because when I studied and prepared for this DVD, I realised there's two plans you can do here. Well, maybe more than two plans, but one plan after c6. This is a useful move, by the way, because it prepares b5 and d5 in some situations. It controls the d5 square, and it has a good home now for the queen. The black queen is good on c7 because it gives extra protection to your central pawns. Now the two plans you have here, let's say after a4, which is again the best move, stopping me advancing with b5. I continue with queen c7. So all these moves are very simple. They play themselves. Rook e1. And now I avoid castling straight away for a particular reason. I now play h6. This controls g5. It's a useful move in these variations. And the two plans that black has here. Plan number one is to simply castle, which I played in this game. And plan number two, which is the typical black lion plan, is with g5. Tally-ho, old boy. Off we go to the races. And g5 is a very aggressive way to play and a very interesting way to play. Now again, the research I've done this, I don't believe g5 is always a good move. Let me just clarify that point. I think g5 is premature in a lot of positions. And my rule of thumb, which I have written on my thumb, so when I'm playing chess I can just pretend I'm picking my nose, but I'm actually looking at my little notes there, is that if white plays h3, I play g5. Why would white play h3? You might be thinking, well, white wants to develop the bishop on c1. He wants to play bishop e3, but he doesn't want to run into knight to g4, which is an annoying move. So if white plays h3, then my general rule of thumb is to play the moves g5, knight f8, knight g6, and g4. Now, the plan of g5, g4 becomes much stronger for black when there's a white pawn on h3. Why? Because when the black pawn gets to g4, so imagine Gary the g pawn running up the board like Usain Bolt. When it gets to g4, you're going to open up some lines because the white pawn is on h3. If he takes on g4, you open up the g file. If he doesn't take on g4, you will capture on h3, again opening up the g file. So that's my rule of thumb, but of course rules can be broken. Now, the way my opponent played with b3, when I again did my research for this opening, I thought the best strategy, because it's clear now that white wants to put his bishop on b2 or a3. And my rule of thumb here is that you shouldn't play g5. g5, g4 is not as strong because you don't open up lines on the king side, because white's pawn is still on h2, so you don't open up lines. And also there's some tactical problems with pushing the g pawn. A better way to play now, which I worked out, was because, and this is quite logical, you have to think logically when you're playing your moves in the opening, always have some logic, trying to explain my thought processes here. When that bishop moves away from the defense of f4, that means that the f4 square is an ideal square for a piece. What piece do I want to get there? My knight on d7. This knight wants to come around to f4. And my figuring is when white goes b3, I want to castle kingside, and we're going to see this plan in operation. But I just want to tell you how I'm thinking. There is another reason that this plan with g5, I believe, is wrong here. I mean, normally black goes knight f8 first. You could play this. I think g5 as well. Let's say we do the g5 move order. And now bishop b2. And now the whole point of g5, as pointed out in this book, The Black Lion, a very interesting book. And if you want to know a bit more about this opening, buy the book and wait for my chess-based DVD, is that knight to f8 is black's main idea because this knight wants to travel here and increase pressure. But there's a real big tactical problem now. And can you see the tactical problem? Test yourself. It's basically white to play and win here. And it's been played in a number of games. And that problem, I believe, let me get this right, is pawn takes pawn. Pawn takes pawn. And now the devastating knight takes e5. And after queen takes e5, extremely strong move here, knight to d5. And if black grabs the bishop on b2, knight to c7 is checkmate. Oh dear! Now that is not why you played a black line. Put that back in the bag. Not good. So I don't think g5 is the right idea when white puts his bishop over on the queen side. So that is indeed why after b3 I now changed plans and I castled. And this is more of a Petrov position. So white played bishop b2. And now the knight on d7 is not well placed. It blocks the bishop in. That knight wants to travel to f4, this square here. So rook e8, a standard now manoeuvring idea, allowing the knight to come here, and the rook is well placed on e8, defending my centre. Bishop d3. I was slightly surprised to see this, but my opponent played it very quickly. He was playing instantaneous so far. And the point of this move is he wants to bring his knight around to g3. I think the position's about equal. Knight to f8, knight e2. Now the bishop on d3 defends this pawn. Knight g6, knight g3. So we've both done our manoeuvring over here. And now I probably, around this point, had the longest think. Because, yes, it is a rather... Well, okay, the next move I think is quite natural. Bishop f8. This is where your bishop should go once your knight has manoeuvred. Because it allows your rook extra leverage. The bishop avoids a knight coming in and attacking it. And it defends your kingside a bit safer. Now, after h3, stopping bishop g4, I now had the longest think of the game. Because it's finding the right plan in this position, which is equal. And if I want to win this position, I have to come up with some good ideas. Whose pieces are better? Clearly the knights are all pretty symmetrical. Whose bishops are better? Now let's think logically. Now, my opponent's bishop on b2 looks like a great piece because it attacks the centre. But in actual fact, my undeveloped bishop on c8 is not so bad because this bishop has quite a good range, maybe later on attacking h3 and covering the f5 square. So if a white knight comes in there, I can potentially exchange that piece off. So I don't think my bishop's actually worse placed on c8, even though it's not developed, rather than the bishop on b2. Development, not always good, actually. You want to think that your pieces need to have a role when you're playing chess. But here I came up with a very good plan. Knight to f4, logical of course. My opponent played bishop to f1, he wanted to keep his bishop, and now very important move. The key move, I think, in this game, most important move. And a key move in this opening, and one that I also learnt when preparing for the chess-based DVD. Knight to h7. Key maneuver this. It's really such an important idea to remember. This knight wants to come to g5 and exchange itself off for the knight on f3. If we go back, the knight on f3, this one highlighted, is clearly better than my knight on f6. Why? Because the knight on f3 pressurizes my center more. It gives a lot of pressure to e5. It attacks this square. My knight on f6 is not really doing much. It's not really attacking that square on e4 because it's well defended. I mean, let me show you one variation just to demonstrate this. My initial thought before this was to play g6, covering these squares and getting ready to place my bishop on the long diagonal. But here we can see problems with this now with queen d2. And this knight on f3 is going to play a key role. For example, if I go bishop g7, I now fall into pawn takes e5 and knight takes e5. A little tactic. And you can see my opponent's pressure on this square has been very good. And he's going to take my knight on f4. He's just won a pawn. And I saw this variation in the game. Didn't like it. So the key move, I think, in this game is knight to h7. Very, very key move. My opponent played c4. And now knight to g5. And I had to watch out for my opponent playing c5 here. But I worked out it's not very good. My opponent now swapped off the knight because all of a sudden my pieces are getting quite dangerously placed over here. So he swapped off the knight and now I took with the h-pawn. And this has really improved my position, this maneuver. Look at my knight on f4. I can never be worse with this knight on f4. I have opened up an h-file, could be useful later on. And I'm maybe preparing to move g4 to open up an attacking avenue. And here I was actually very comfortable now. But I think the position is still about equal, but I have plans to attack. d5, my opponent plays on the queen side. I now concentrate on the king side. Now, I was thinking about playing a5 here, trying to hold up my opponent's advance, but I didn't like the maneuver knight to f5 and knight to e3. I thought my opponent's knight would be quite happy on e3 when he can try to kick my knight away with g3. I didn't want him to kick my strong knight away. So instead of a5, I play g6, a useful move, because now I have potential to put something on g7, even my king in some chances, so my rook can come over, and I stop his knight coming in. My opponent pushes on the queen side. I try to block on the queen side for now with c5, because I want to keep things closed on the area of the board I'm weakest, that is the queen side, so I can concentrate on the area of the board I'm strongest, the king side. My opponent b4, very logical move, opening up lines there. I now took queen a4, attacking my rook, attacking the pawn. And now I had a plan, queen e7. My opponent played queen takes b4 rather quickly here. He should have played the move f3, as we're going to see why. Because after queen takes b4, now how do I attack here? I'm okay. I don't really have many structural problems. Yes, he has a bit of open lines on the queen side, but none of my pawns are particularly weak. Maybe b7 a little bit, but it's well defended. But I want to attack. You play, you know, my knight is on f4. Ideal square to attack. g4. Time to give up. Well, it's Harry, actually. Harry's moved its way up. Again, my favourite pawn. Harry is giving up his life for the cause. H takes g4, and now one of the reasons I move my queen here, queen h4. And suddenly things are looking a little bit scary for my opponent. Rook a3, excellent defensive move, defending laterally. Bishop takes g4. Now if my opponent takes on b7, I have a rook b8. My opponent played another excellent move because all I need to do now is try to get a rook to the h-file. It takes a couple of moves, but, you know, king g7, bishop e7, rook h8, and then it will be checkmate. This is my plan, one of my plans. So knight e2, excellent move. Swapping off this great knight and allowing the rook to defend. Rook c8, bringing my last piece into the game, a little bit of pressure on c4. And here my opponent probably should have taken on f4 in actual fact. Now, I wasn't scared about queen c3 here because of rook e5. And this rook is coming to the h-file. There's no checkmate on the long diagonal. I'm covering all the squares, excuse me. So, but maybe he should take this and do a move like f3. But even here, I think I should be adequately placed here. His dart squares look very weak around his king. So I should be able to generate some kind of attack. Maybe my bishop can slowly move its way into g3 there. That'd be like a King's Indian defense middle game plan. So instead of f3, my opponent, instead of taking on e4, my opponent now played g3. And he was getting a bit shorter time here, which didn't help. But now, knight to h3 check. He doesn't really want to give up his bishop for the knight because his light squares will be too weak. So he has to move his king. Now simply queen h5. A bit like a Dutch defense now. My main idea in this position is knight g5. This is a massive move. Knight g5 followed by something to e3 check or something to h3 check. Something like this. This would be very, very dangerous for him. So my opponent goes knight g1 to defend and swap off these threats. I eliminate this knight, and now it's time to think about how to get a piece to the h-file and attack. And now the rest of the game really played itself, really. f5, bringing in more firepower, threatening a potential f4 move, increasing the pressure over there. And mainly, my pawn is not on f7, so I can do the rook swinger. Rook to c7, rook over to h7, checkmate. And I think white is really, really struggling now. My opponent took on f5. I simply took back with a pawn. Bishop g2, attempting to defend the king side. But now I increase the firepower, bring more pieces into the attack. Rook c7. And this rook is ready to rush over to h7. If you imagine my rook on h7, a typical checkmating idea there would be queen h2 check, followed by something like bishop h3, eliminating his lone defender. Something like that would be quite painful. And also I maybe have the f pawn coming in. My opponent played f4, trying to block this pawn on f5 from moving. And now I had a number of tempting moves. I went for the simple pawn takes f4 here, because he's also weak on the e-file. Too many of my opponent's pieces are over on the queen side. And when I played this move, I thought quite a long time about it. I saw one very attractive variation, which tempted me into playing it. And that was after, well, he has to really now, well, he played rook e6, but he has to really, instead of this move, take on e8. This is pretty much forced. He can't take on f4 because I have a little tactic. Rook takes c4 here. And this overloads the queen's defense of e1. For example, I'm winning quite easily now. So the line I calculated mainly was rook takes e8, queen takes e8, pawn takes f4, and now simply rook to e7, taking control of this file, threatening to come into a1 with check. And it looks like I imagine I should be winning here. And my line I calculated during the game was rook a1, trying to cover this move. And now rook to e2, threatening queen to e3 check. I thought now my opponent would be forced to play queen c3. And here, rook takes b2. Again, this is following my calculations. Bishop to g7. And here, I thought my opponent was in a lot of trouble. Something like queen here. And now the point is that I don't take the rook immediately. This would be a mistake. I first of all play bishop d4 check. Now, if king f1, queen e2 is checkmate. So in this position, my opponent, I thought, would be forced to go here. And now I thought, well, I have ideas of queen h5 check or even bishop to e3, when my three attacking units should be winning. And one nice line I saw was queen f1, only way to defend, f4, and now bishop e2. And if queen takes bishop, bishop takes f4 check, and I win the queen. So my attack comes through here. So that didn't actually happen, but I think, you know, this is why I took on f4. I thought that this was a nice way to win. My opponent instead blundered with rook e6. He was quite short of time, but after I simply take on e6 and now played a winning move, f3, my opponent is completely lost, because I'm either going to win a piece, and if the bishop moves, well, I guess there's a couple of options here. d5, allowing my bishop on f8 to come in the game is one way to win, or even just simply rook to h7, which has been my plan all along, to get this double power on the h-file. So generally that went very well. It's a nice victory on the Saturday for me against a good IM with the black pieces, and a victory in the black lion. So a very interesting opening. And again, I'm doing a DVD on this, and I might start playing this a lot more now. But some general rules. I mean, the black line is, I suppose, where you go g5, which I didn't do in this game. Instead, because my opponent played b3, I went for this other plan of castling and bringing the knight into f4. But a very flexible opening, and one of the things that attracts me about this opening is, look how many pieces are remained on the board. It's not like a Berlin. Every single piece is still on the board, meaning that you're bound to have a rich, exciting, aggressive middle game battle, because everything's on the board, so both players will have chances to attack, and it keeps lots of great winning chances. So very interesting opening, the black line. Hope you enjoyed that sort of, should I say, tutorial basically of the black line and some of the potential it has in the middle game. Please like and subscribe to my channel if you did enjoy that tutorial, and of course, again, please check out my website GingerGM.com and check out this D4 DVD. I'll leave you with a link to that if you're interested in, again, having a lesson like I just did there, but for over 11 hours. Okay, it is a little bit of money you have to pay, but obviously the more you pay, the more likely I am to do videos, and it helps me out a lot. So thank you anyway. Of course, don't feel forced to buy it if you don't want to. Just enjoy the free DVDs. We all love something that's free, eh? The free videos. We all love something that's free. So thank you very much for tuning in, and thank you. Please leave your comments. I'll try to get around to responding. Been very busy recently, but thank you so much for watching these videos. It means a lot to me, and yeah, just thank you. Give yourself a pat on the back. Cheers, and goodbye for the time being.